In the immortal words of Bela Lugosi in the original 1931 Dracula, I bid you welcome to episode 45 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. Once again, I'd like to thank you all for joining me for tonight's podcast episode. If you are here via the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, please don't forget to click like, smash the subscriber bell, and turn on those notifications if you haven't done so already. Or if you're joining me for the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or the other platforms, same general rule applies. If you haven't done so already, click like, subscribe, and flip on those notifications. So once again, I find myself kind of a little bit ahead of the curve because I watched the very much critically praised, but still somewhat underseen film, The Holdovers, last night, directed by Alexander Payne and starring Paul Giamatti. And the two men had worked together almost 2 decades ago in the very successful Oscar-winning film, I believe Payne won for adapted screenplay, if I'm not mistaken, Sideways. But before I get into my thoughts on the movie The Holdovers, which, before I forget, it is in theaters. It's actually playing at a theater about 5 miles from me, but it's streaming free on Peacock. It's also available to rent on Amazon Prime, but if you have access to Peacock, it's streaming free, no commercials. And I watched it last night. But I want to get into a little bit of, I don't know if I'd use the word retrospective, but I have been a Paul Giamatti fan for more than a quarter of a century. I think that he is fantastic and a guy whose career has been somewhat underrated, even though he does have segments of people such as myself who've always talked up just how talented he is and how much of an impression he makes even in smaller roles. But something a lot of people don't know about Paul Giamatti, his father is A. Bartlett Giamatti, who is the former commissioner of Major League Baseball, and he is either fortunately or unfortunately, the guy who had to make the decision to throw Pete Rose out of baseball. And then A. Bartlett Giamatti passed not long after that, at the time, very controversial decision to ban Pete Rose from baseball. And I didn't know when Paul Giamatti first came on the scene. I didn't think, oh, maybe it's A. Bartlett Giamatti's son. I didn't actually know that until there's a scene in the movie Sideways where they have a photograph of the two of them. And I saw the movie in theaters. I'm like, that's A. Bartlett Giamatti. And then when I went on the internet after that movie, didn't have a phone, I realized, yeah, Paul Giamatti is the son of the former commissioner of Major League Baseball, who, man, he was only 51 when he died. It's incredible. And the irony of all of that is that A. Bartlett Giamatti was a Pete Rose fan. And as much as Pete Rose lambasted so many different people connected to that, and he was full of shit. He lied for 15 years. He kept saying he didn't bet on baseball, and then he admitted it. I mean, that's just the way that it goes. But Rose liked A. Bartlett Giamatti. The amount of people that he kind of ripped along the way, he didn't rip him. So I don't know how or why, but he had a lot of respect for Giamatti. He almost, at least my memory of it, is that Rose made it seem as if Giamatti was forced into throwing him out of baseball. I don't know if that's true, but it is unfortunate. Paul Giamatti was still a very young man when his father died prematurely. 51, for crying out loud, a year older than I am now. But, you know, he was a guy who was an academic at Yale. This is Paul's father. And then was made the commissioner of baseball. You want to talk about a guy achieving a lot at a relatively young age. It's pretty fucking awesome. And it's tragic that he died so young. And nobody knew that his health was in jeopardy. Yeah, he was a heavy smoker, but a lot of people are heavy smokers. But that's beside the point. One of Paul Giamatti, that is, early visible roles. Many of you have seen the movie Donnie Brasco. I think it's a terrific gangster-style movie as kind of like the mid-level mob. Whereas, you know, Goodfellas and The Godfather are up here dealing in things like prostitution and gambling, numbers running, loan sharking. The guys in Donnie Brasco are still knocking the heads off parking meters to make a few bucks. Like, it's not as sexy as the other movies. But Paul Giamatti plays the FBI tech who has the now iconic, legendary conversation with Johnny Depp as FBI agent Joe Pistone. Forget about it. Giamatti is the tech that has that incredible back and forth with Johnny Depp about the number of permutations of the word forget about it. And I remember watching that movie and just being, this is fucking hilarious. I kept rewinding it. This is great. And the following year, 1998, Paul Giamatti had 3 huge movies where he had roles of varying sizes. So he's in The Truman Show. He plays, again, a tech. He plays one of the techs, the TV station that's broadcasting The Truman Show around the world. And he doesn't have that much to do until a sort of, again, I'm not going to give the movie away, but if you haven't seen it, it's one of the best films of the decade. But Ed Harris, as the creator of the TV show, is trying to do something that Giamatti's character cannot in good conscience take part in. And he basically is somebody that's been pushed around. He stands on his head and says he's not going to do it. And just in those few minutes, you see the decency, the humanity in Paul Giamatti's face. And it's not necessarily even that sympathetic of a character. You can argue that nobody involved with that TV show is in any way sympathetic, but the way he comes across in that scene, you remember him. So he was in that, and he had a small but kind of pivotal role in Saving Private Ryan, which came out right around the same time as The Truman Show. He's one of the soldiers after the guys, make it inland and they're looking for Private Ryan. And he's not in the movie for that much, but he again registers. He has gravitas, even as, so much of a younger actor 25 years ago. You remember him. And he was in a very underrated, terrific, kind of a dramatic thriller or thriller drama with Sam Jackson and Kevin Spacey, The Negotiator, and the late, great J.T. Walsh. Fucking home run cast. A terrific film where Samuel Jackson is playing not a Samuel Jackson type of a character, and the movie is terrific. And Giamatti actually has a bigger role in that film than the others. Now, the first role of his that theoretically, if the film had been more successful, he could have gotten some Oscar consideration, is one of my favorite films ever, Man on the Moon, with Jim Carrey playing Great Neck Native, and I talked about him in a previous podcast, Andy Kaufman. Giamatti is the second lead, and it's the kind of role that if the movie had been better received, he probably gets a Best Supporting Actor nomination, playing a real-life guy, Bob Zmuda, who was Andy Kaufman's best friend and writing partner, and came up with some of the crazy schemes that Kaufman was famous for. Giamatti is brilliant in that film. He was also in Big Fat Liar. He was in Private Parts with Howard Stern playing himself. But his best work came later as the 2000s kind of went forth. And he was terrific in a movie, Confidence, with, was it Andy Garcia, I believe, Dustin Hoffman, Edward Burns. And he's terrific in that movie, like your basic con artist film. Very, very strong performance. But in 2003, Giamatti appears in a film, another one that it gets my highest recommendation. I believe it's on Max now, but it's not that difficult to find. It's called American Splendor, and it's another story based in truth on a kind of underground comic book artist. Was a terrible artist, but he had great ideas, and he was the first. He wrote comic books about ordinary people, in this case himself, a guy named Harvey Pekar, that's the name of the guy in real life, and the character that Giamatti plays. It was a very successful underground comic book, and Pekar was such a cranky, kind of angry, sarcastic guy that he became a bit of a celebrity in his own right. And in the 80s, he appeared on the old David Letterman a million years ago, 40 years ago. Letterman loved him. But then the real Pekar got the idea that Letterman was just having him on to kind of make fun of him. Because he was a very intelligent guy, but he was just a file clerk. And there was a sense that they were kind of laughing at him and not with him. And then there was a little bit of strife and controversy. Giamatti's performance in American Splendor is amazing because he's playing a real guy who appears in the film. Like it was almost a docudrama, but not really, because they mixed up a lot of the real events, and the unfolding of the story is not really exactly what happened. But the way that he did the voice, because the real Harvey Pekar always had issues with his voice, and Giamatti somehow nailed that. And he has a scene where his character has some kind of a nodule on his vocal cords, and it hurts him to speak. Giamatti is so talented and so skilled that each time, and I've seen the movie at least 10 times, when he gets to a point where he's trying to tell his first wife, please don't leave me, you feel pain in your own throat. That is how good he is coming across and registering. So the movie got a lot of acclaim, didn't make that much money, and it might have gotten an Oscar nomination or two for the screenplay. Pulcini and Berman were the writers and filmmakers. I don't know if it got more than one or two Oscar nominations. It did get Independent Spirit Awards, and Sean Penn, that was the year of I Am Sam. I love Sean Penn as an actor. He's a kind of controversial personality, to say the least. He's always out front. He's a big personality. He's another guy had a reputation for being a real pain in the ass when he was younger. But Penn, forgetting his personal life and some of the travails, nobody ever questioned the fact this guy's a fucking brilliant actor. And that particular year, Penn ended up winning an Oscar for Mystic River. And he mentioned Giamatti as somebody who he really liked, and was almost come across as if he was surprised that Giamatti didn't actually win the award. Like he, as a fellow actor, was dazzled by Paul Giamatti in American Splendor. The following year, as if he needed even then to prove just how varied he could be and how many different kinds of characters, because people were saying, well, he always plays a schlemiel. Listen, he doesn't have leading man looks. He doesn't have a leading man build. It doesn't mean that he's always playing a schlemiel or a character that isn't that attractive. He's a normal looking guy. That's one of the things that was great about the 1970s is you had a lot of actors who didn't have leading man looks who were playing leading man roles. Bronson, Scheider, Shaw, guys like that. You didn't have to look like Dustin Hoffman, for crying out loud. You didn't have to look like Redford or Beatty. You could look like James Caan or Gene Hackman. So Giamatti followed up this incredible performance in American Splendor. I mean, he's so good. Every scene, he fucking nails it. Ordinary life is pretty complex stuff. He nails the character, the opening scene of him walking as the credits are running. He has a look on his face, just a look on his face. I understand this guy. 30 seconds, and you get it. And that performance just does not let up. He just is incredible from first frame to last in American Splendor. So the next year, he worked with Alexander Payne, a fantastic filmmaker. May have seen The Descendants with George Clooney about 11 or 12 years ago. Really, really good. He got more out of Clooney. Now, Clooney's a guy who can direct himself and produce. Payne got more out of Clooney than a lot of other filmmakers have gotten. Because, let's face it, he looks like George Clooney. It's kind of like, he's this generation's Cary Grant to some extent. You can argue more overall talent because he's a terrific filmmaker, Clooney that is. But Payne got a lot out of Clooney in that role, in The Descendants. And in the movie Sideways, it's a little bit, I always thought it was a little bit weird and a little bit unfair because his co-star, Thomas Hayden Church, was nominated for supporting actor, and his other co-star, Virginia Madsen, who I love just because of Candyman, which was already a dozen years prior, she got nominated. But somehow Paul Giamatti did not get nominated. That always pissed me off because it's his movie. It's his character's story. And, his character, does he grow and change throughout the story, or is he pretty much the same guy at the end as the beginning? It's a really good performance. You feel the character's pain, and Giamatti is he's so solid in this role. It's just a wonderful performance. And then not long after that, I want to say it was the next year, was it 2005? He's in Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe as the famous boxer, James J. Braddock, whose nickname, not surprisingly, was the Cinderella Man. He was one of the unlikeliest heavyweight champions in the history of boxing, the real Jim Braddock. He was kind of an undersized heavyweight, and he ended up winning the title from a very tough and rugged and very hard-hitting and powerful fighter named Max Baer, who ended up becoming an actor himself, as well as his brother Buddy. They both fought and lost to Joe Louis, as Jim Braddock really got his clock cleaned by Joe Louis. But that was another terrific Giamatti performance. And there was Oscar buzz, and it just didn't happen. And he's had other movies where people singled him out for praise in the intervening years where, man, Giamatti's great. He's not going to get nominated, though. And this theme, even in movies like Barney's Version, which didn't really get that much acclaim with Dustin Hoffman, a lot of people liked it, but there was no real Oscar buzz. It just seems like this guy kept being great and was just not getting recognized. And it certainly wasn't personal, because he's very popular among his peers. As I say, Sean Penn, of all people, going out of his way to say, I just love Giamatti in that role, man. He's great. And he's not one that's known for just throwing bouquets of praise at other people. So to kind of skip forward to The Holdovers, which, as I say, I watched last night, it's advertised as a comedy drama, and it is. Sideways is also a comedy drama, but more leaning towards the comedy, as although the main character goes through a lot of personal trauma, and he's just dealing with a lot of shit between his ears, and falling in love, and what's going to happen, and my best friend is an asshole, and all of this stuff. The Holdovers is simultaneously a sweeter, gentler film while being less comedic than Sideways. So it's one of the reasons why Sideways is so damn good. Another film I highly recommend if you haven't seen it is because the laughs are very broad, but the characters experience significant disappointments and outright pain in that film. So for all the laughs, it's very, very serious. And Holdovers is not as laugh out loud funny, but it's different stakes. It's a different kind of story. It's set in 1971, 72. And the title is almost literal. Giamatti plays an instructor at a boarding school, and we're led to, he's very intelligent. He had gone to Harvard, and he's the instructor that nobody wants to get because he's not that easy to get along with. And when it's like semester break, everybody goes home, except certain people who can't leave because they have nowhere to go, where their family is away or there's something going on in the house, and we don't have money to send you to a hotel or whatever. And a young man, an actor who just pretty much got his start, named Dominic Sessa, the two of them spend a lot of the film together. And the other main character is a woman who is the kind of cook, and she's sort of the voice of reason for huge chunks of the story. I forgot her name. I'm going to actually look this up. But she's gotten a lot of Oscar buzz herself. Divine Joy Randolph. I don't know why I have trouble remembering that. But the odds are that she is going to win Best Supporting Actress, because it's this kind of role that sneaks up on you. You get little bits and pieces of her character, just as you understand that the kid that Paul Giamatti is, as I say, kind of stuck with, the kid is under his supervision because he has nowhere to go. His father is not well, and his mom has married another man, and she's going away, so he's stuck there, and the kid is just going stir crazy. And the character is Mary. She's a voice of reason until her personal trauma and turmoil kind of bubbles to the surface. And the story progresses in what I would describe as an unhurried way. Whereas Sideways, although there are scenes of really not that much going on, the pace of Sideways is like bullet train level. It's really fast because the Thomas Hayden Church character just is trying to hook up literally with every woman that he meets. because he wants to, no pun intended, in the immortal words of Chevy Chase, want to go out with a bang. He's about to get married, so he wants to go out with multiple bangs and get with as many women as possible before getting married. And presumably he's going to do the same thing, but he's telling himself, this is it, this is it, this is it. But the movie, despite the long shots and the unhurried manner in which Alexander Payne composes not only the frames, but the scenes. Like, there are moments of characters just walking from one location to another that most other filmmakers, you could have lost 5 to 10 minutes of this film. But he wants to, Alexander Payne that is, he wants to make us feel as if we're living this movie with the characters. And for me, somebody who loves high-tempo action movies as much as anybody, I'm a guy, I can sit here and argue about silent films from the 1920s, and who is a better filmmaker, D.W. Griffith or F.W. Murnau? I can appreciate this kind of movie too. And the kind of lazy pace draws you in, and the performances are so solid. Man, everyone in this movie brings their A game. As I say, a lot of people I'm not familiar with. Tate Donovan, who had famously once, I believe he was engaged to Jennifer Aniston in the 90s. He kind of shows up late. He's great. And he's an actor I never liked, but he sells his part perfectly. So we don't know where the story is going to go. And I remember watching it saying, I hope this doesn't happen, this doesn't happen, this doesn't happen. And not because I was afraid of a sad ending, but there were certain things that were teased in the first half of the movie that I said, oh, I really hope that this doesn't happen because this is too much of a cliche. I really hope that, oh God, I hope that doesn't happen. And it's as if Alexander Payne set it up that way so people like me would think we knew where the story was going, or hoping against hope that it's not going there, and then it doesn't. And, I'm ashamed to say I have not seen Oppenheimer. What I would have to say of the movies that I've seen from 2023, what I think is the best film I've seen is Leave the World Behind, which, as we know, the reactions are all over the map. Just like Don't Look Up a couple of years ago. Don't Look Up. Memory is, it made the same number of 10 best lists as 10 worst lists. Now, Leave the World Behind, not to that extent, but there were a lot of critics, and when it played in Europe, there were 1-star reviews coming back. And then suddenly it hits, and people are like, what the fuck movie did they watch? This is incredible. But then other people were saying, yeah, it was good until the ending, which was shit. I didn't like it. I can't recommend it, or whatever. This is the best film of 2023, or that of movies that were released in 2023. And as I say, I haven't seen Oppenheimer, and from what almost everybody has told me, it's a masterpiece. And I love Christopher Nolan. I didn't love Insomnia. I wanted to love it. Pacino, Robin Williams. It's good. It's not great. And Memento is brilliant. Not really a fan. Love Guy Pearce. Love Carrie-Anne Moss. Love Joe Pantoliano, Joey Pants. Memento is a great experiment. You want to talk about great filmmakers doing experimental films? Alfred Hitchcock doing Rope, one 10-minute take after another. Memento was an experimental film. It's not bad. It's a movie I always recommend to people. 3 stars out of 4. Don't think that it's a masterpiece. Point is, Christopher Nolan is probably going to win Best Director. It's his time. He is the finest filmmaker working right now. Non-Martin Scorsese, Spielberg, Coppola, James Cameron edition. And look, plenty of people would argue that Nolan is a more talented filmmaker than those guys. I don't really give a shit. It doesn't matter. They're all great. Okay? When I did my episode on greatest Hollywood filmmaker of all time, they left out Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock. But gun to my head, you want me to say who was the greatest? It's Kubrick. And I literally, that's a hill that I'll go down on. Nobody made films like Kubrick, but Chris Nolan is the closest. His shot compositions remind you of Kubrick. This is not an accident. It isn't like a big deal when a filmmaker said, I love Stanley Kubrick. Well, of course you do. if you're a filmmaker, of course you love Stanley Kubrick. Every now and then you'll see a Quentin Tarantino, who, as we know, is not afraid to ruffle feathers, where Tarantino doesn't seem to be as big of a Hitchcock fan as you would think. Not that the guy sucked, but he felt that Hitchcock was hamstrung by the system and that his movies would have been better if he had more freedom. He seemed to be trolling him. That some of Hitchcock's films, which people like me consider all-timers, Tarantino felt were missed opportunities because Hitchcock had to work within the confines of the studio system, whereas somebody like Kubrick was able to get around it. In that regard, I don't think that Tarantino's take is accurate. But the point is, I believe that it's Christopher Nolan's time, and I think that he is going to win Best Director for Oppenheimer. Although, again, Alexander Payne is very well respected in the industry. He's very popular and very well liked. And it seems stupid to think that very well liked carries anything, but it does. But Nolan also is exceedingly well spoken. And what I like is that his IQ is probably 150 or 160. Is not Kubrick. Kubrick, as I talked about on the Full Metal Jacket podcast, they're normal, really smart people. And then there's a guy like Stanley Kubrick, who was probably, his IQ was that of J. Robert Oppenheimer. Like, Stanley Kubrick's IQ was estimated at over 180. He was not a normal, very smart person. He was literally a genius. I believe that Chris Nolan is in a ballpark, but he speaks like a normal person. And he does not come across as holier than thou or as somebody who talks down to interviewers. And Scorsese doesn't do that either, and neither does Spielberg or Coppola. But occasionally you'll get a feeling that the interviewer doesn't have any idea what they're saying. And I appreciate that Nolan knows how to break things down in layman's terms, because it's different if Christopher Nolan is giving an interview to Film Comment or Sight and Sound. He's going to just let him have it. He's going to talk about the science behind a swish pan and a science behind a traveling mat. But in a normal interview, he's just going to talk at a nursery school level as to how he did certain things when he's asked a question. And nobody's going to ask him anything that in depth. So the upshot of all of this, I don't expect Alexander Payne to win Best Director, although if you just go by the reviews, there are plenty of people that are saying stuff like, hey, we love Chris Nolan's film. The Holdovers is the best film of the year. In a fantasy world, Paul Giamatti would win Best Actor. But I believe that Cillian Murphy will win because the buzz on him, and if you go by the odds makers, he is not just the odds on favorite, he is a significant favorite. Now, sometimes enough people in the Academy have told enough people the way that they're going to vote, where the Steven Spielbergs of the world can pretty much figure out who's going to win what. I don't know that, but the way the odds are set right now, it looks like Murphy's going to win. And Christopher Nolan's going to win, and Oppenheimer will win Best Picture. Now, again, I haven't seen it, so I can't say, well, The Holdovers is much better. All I can tell you is, of the movies that might get nominated, Holdovers will get nominated. It is an extraordinary film. Highly recommend that you check it out. Again, you can watch it for free in the comfort of your own home, just as I did last night. And, maybe you'll think it sucks. Maybe the pace of it won't work for you. Maybe you'll be like, this fucking guy, what are you talking about? This is the most boring movie ever. Look, Chariots of Fire, my number one favorite movie of all time. About at least a quarter of people who watch it say, Jared, this movie is boring as shit. What the hell is wrong with you? I don't think you're going to feel the same way about The Holdovers, but hey, that's what makes a horse race, right? Just because it's 96, 97, 98% on Rotten Tomatoes doesn't mean you're not going to think it's a turkey. You're entitled. But it's a great movie and an incredible performance from an underrepresented historically for just how damn good he is, and an amazing turn by Paul Giamatti as Paul Hunham. And with that, we have come to the end of episode 45 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all once again for joining me this evening. And if you're checking this out on the YouTube channel, if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to click like, subscribe, and flip on those notifications. Or if you're joining me for the audio version of the podcast, same thing. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications from Spotify, iTunes, or any of the other platforms. I'll be back with episode 46 real soon. Peace.